Hello and welcome to another episode of Gaming as a Career. Today we have Jason Wyman. Is that right? Wayman? Is that correct? Am I
Close
saying it
enough.
right?
No,
Did I butcher your last name?
oh no, it's
Jason, sorry.
Wyman, but I've heard it pronounced a
Wyman.
million different ways, and that's just the way that my mom pronounced it. So who knows?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, Jason. Um, Again, I don't want to butcher his career and his introduction, so I'll just hand it to you, Jason. Just tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll carry the conversation.
Sure. So I've been a game developer for, I don't know, 20 years or so, working in AAA games and indie stuff, and also a lot outside of game development. So let me just kind of rewind a little bit. I started in software around 20 years ago at Intel, and then switched over to doing game development at Sony. Worked on a couple of different MMOs. From there, decided to take a little break and go back into enterprise development. Worked at Qualcomm for a little while and a couple other places. Decided to go back into game development because in enterprise stuff, while it's interesting, it's just not nearly as fun and rewarding as game development was for me. I jumped back into games and made a whole bunch more small, middle-sized games, some mobile stuff. Jumped right in when iOS was kind of first coming out. We started releasing mobile games for the first iPhone, and then now I primarily work on YouTube, teaching other people how to make games, doing a little bit of consulting here and there when it's needed for people who are working on games and having problems, but mostly just teaching other people how to make their own games, how to get better at making games, and teaching professional developers how to just improve their workflows and processes. And then doing just tons of YouTube stuff.
Sounds great. For the audience, Jason has a large community of followers on YouTube. I think it's around 100K subs, right? So
It's getting close to 200, I think,
almost 200.
Hopefully by the time
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, and he provides tips and guidance on game development. So I would definitely recommend checking him out on YouTube. So Jason, tell us a little bit about how it started for you. So like how you got into game development. So if you recall, I mean, it's been 20 years, right?
I definitely do. Yeah, I remember the first game dev job I got and exactly how I got it. But before I got it, I was actually just a big video game player. So in the late 90s, mid 90s, I played a ton of PC games. I was addicted to them, played nonstop, especially multiplayer games. And the biggest one that I was into at the time, right before I kind of got into the industry, was EverQuest. And I'd play it just nonstop, way more than I should definitely admit on camera. So anyway, I'd been playing that game nonstop for a very, very long time. And I actually applied for a couple different positions working on that game and a couple other games that I was interested in, but I had zero experience, zero qualifications, and I never heard anything back from any of them. So I applied to all these game companies as a teenager with no experience and just literally nothing to offer really, other than I liked the games, and never heard anything back. After that, I started working in software just a little bit. I got a entry-level position doing some testing and software development at Intel. It was just kind of a position I applied for, wasn't sure if I could do. Went in there and realized that it was a lot easier than I thought. And I found that this has kind of been the case, I think, throughout my entire career. Every single job that I thought was going to be difficult was dramatically easier when I started it. Like I got into the job and was like, oh, this is a whole lot easier. Everything except for physical labor type jobs. Anything that was physical labor, I was like, this is a lot harder. Anything that I thought was going to actually be difficult and like, I'm never going to be able to figure this out, tended to be a lot easier. So I was working a little bit in software development, logged into the game that I played all the time, and got a random message from a friend of mine, a guy who I'd talked to in game, said, hey, I know you do a little bit of coding. Would you be interested in coming to work for me on this new game? And I instantly said, of course. What are you talking about? Like, I barely know any coding, but of course, yeah, I definitely want to come work there. And I talked to him, got on a call, did a little phone interview, and decided almost instantly that I was going to take this position. So I talked to my wife and told her, hey, in 2 weeks, we're going to move across the country to go take this job. And I think it's going to be really awesome. And she really did not want to go, but she was willing to try it. I told her, hey, if it sucks, if you hate it, we can move back anytime. If you say like, hey, this is terrible, I can't do this, well, we'll just move back. Let's just go try it and give it a shot. I figure like, what's the worst that happens? Like, go there and hate it and then come back and try something else. Anyway, took that position. Again, it was much easier than I expected it to be. And then slowly kind of from there, once I was in the industry, that was a position writing tools for the QA department. So it's like writing tools for a QA department, tiny little position in a big company. And it was a blast. It definitely pushed me right into the industry, and then had a whole bunch of weird stuff happen right after that, because I got laid off 3 weeks after I got that job.
Ouch.
Yes. It worked out for the better though.
All right, so we are going to follow up on that, but just to add to Jason's point, I remember, so like you, I used to be like a savage World of Warcraft player during my high school days. So I used to play 19 hours a day, and that was crazy. But I mean, I've also learned a lot. So especially that I was international. I used to talk to English speakers. I was playing on Europe's, European servers, and we had German people, French people, and then I used to talk to them in English a lot, and that helped with my English. So maybe that was the benefit, but like not the 19 hours a day. But anyways, I remember back then, like similar to what you said, you try to apply for these gaming companies, like Blizzard was one of the companies that started recruiting players, like top players early on, and they joined their development team for character development. And when I was reading some of the biographies of these people, I've noticed that they were just World of Warcraft players early on, and they got recruited because they had something to add. And now they are like seniors in the company after like 20 years. Of course, it was not a route for you, but that's interesting. So you tried it and didn't work. So going back to your comment.
But it almost was somewhat in the same vein though, because the guy who got me into the position was one of the game masters for the server. So he was one of the guys that was running around monitoring the server.
I see.
And he was talking to all the super active people. So I used to run a guild on there, and we'd do all the like top end content and stuff, and he'd be following around and interacting with us. And that's how I got to know him, out of like all the people that I got to know. And when you talk about just the people that you met on there, it's another thing that I think gets a little bit undervalued, but a lot of the people that I'm still very close friends with were actually friends of mine in EverQuest. Like I give people that I'd never met until years after we stopped playing, that are still extremely close friends, like go to their weddings, and they get me into betas of the games that nobody's supposed to know about and all kinds of stuff. Like it's interesting the friendships you make.
Of course, that's very interesting, because I mean, I see a lot of similarities, because I found a friend through World of Warcraft. We met later, so we were living in the same city. So we actually learned about each other through World of Warcraft. That's how we became friends, and then we met. And his mother was a manager in an inspection company, and that's how I got my first job. He actually found me my first job. And yeah, I see a lot of similarities there. But yeah, these digital friendships can turn into more, and that's very interesting. So just the network that you create. So tell us about ups and downs of the journey and the road. So I think a lot of people who are watching or listening are interested to learn about the difficulties. Tell me about the nights that you had to stay awake to finish the projects. I know there has been maybe more than one of them, but yeah, I'm interested to learn about that.
Well, it is an interesting thing. It's something that comes up a lot. People are usually concerned about, I think, working too much with game development. But in my experience, all of the times when I had a big problem with game development, it was a fun thing. It was something where I was actually like solving a problem that was interesting and fun. And it was almost never an overwhelming, like, this is, I don't want to be here doing this. It would be like everybody who's into it and really wants to be staying there working on the problem. And the other problems that aren't huge like that were never really as big of an issue as I think it gets kind of made out to be a lot in the media. I know in some, obviously there's going to be some extreme edge case companies that are terrible, and those ones get focused on a lot. But in my experience, most game companies are actually really pretty laid back. Like the people that are working there are relatively chill. The deadlines and the process and everything, it's relatively calm unless there's some sort of like game breaking live emergency. Then everybody's focused on fixing that. And that's more of a thing that happens if you're working on like an MMO game that has live servers, or some other multiplayer game where, you know, maybe there's a service outage type thing. And even then it's going to be just the people that really understand that part that are focused on it. But like working throughout the nights, crunching on trying to get some level done is not something that most people ended up doing. However, in the enterprise world, I found it to be a lot more commonly accepted to just force people to work overtime. In games, it seemed like forced overtime was kind of a rare thing. In the enterprise place, it's less frowned upon and more thought of as like a way to get ahead. So everybody's kind of doing it. There's a lot more people forcing themselves, self-forcing themselves to work, 60 hours to try to be the one to get the promotion and to get this new project done and get the promotion, or expecting everybody else to be doing that because they're doing that. In games, I didn't see that happen nearly as much, which is very strange. Yeah, I would have kind of thought the opposite from everything, but I guess it's probably just the fact that you're not all like vying for promotions nearly as much in game industries. In the game industry, there's like one lead on each team, and that's pretty much it. There's like, you're there and you can get promotions, but it's not like really a fight for promotions where it is in the bigger corporate places where you've got these big structures.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense actually. Especially that like the audience are also different for games versus like non-games. If you just think about the software perspective, if you see a game as a software, like the audience are different, of course. So now that you have been in the industry for 20 years, so for someone who's new and thinking about this route, would you be able to like give them a picture of the routes and different ways that they could engage with game development? Like maybe there are of course there are job titles, but I mean of course that are not commonly heard, but they are part of the game development. For example, lore or story designers, apart from developers. Would you be able to give a clear picture of different jobs and how they get involved, and different opportunities for the people who are thinking about this, like about the ways that they can engage with the whole industry?
Yeah, so let's start with where I started, and then we'll go through all the rest of them. So the first one is just being a programmer. If you already, like, you're young and started learning how to code as a teenager, and you can write some code and you've figured out a little bit of game engine stuff so that you can maybe make your own games. I know that not everybody is going to be in this boat, but If you are, what I would recommend is to just try getting into whatever company you can as just a beginner programmer, like an entry level associate programmer. Just go straight into it. If you can write some game code, you can make things work to the very basics. Get one of those jobs, work there for a while, and then find another position at a bigger place. You'll learn a lot on the job really, really fast. You'll be kind of forced to, and you'll get paid to do it. If you haven't got those skills and you want to get into programming, I would say learn to code a little bit. However you want to do that, go to school, take some stuff online, watch some videos, read some books, whatever it is that you decide. Like, figure out that process and then start applying. And then while you're doing that, if you want to get into the industry, I would recommend going in through either applying for QA positions. It's just like essentially game testing positions. If you're doing that while you're learning how to code, it's going to help a lot. It's going to help because once you've kind of figured it out and you've learned, maybe you spent a year just getting the skills down, you'll already have made connections in the industry and at a company where when those associate or entry level positions pop up, you'll be able to get into them a whole lot easier. Or at the very least, you'll know people who can get you into positions at some other company a lot easier, because you work at a company in QA for a year. People are going to come in, people are going to leave, they're going to go to other companies. You're going to make contacts there as long as you are able to talk to people and make some kind of friends.
Yeah.
Then when positions open up in those other places and you've got a little bit of skill in it, you'll be able to get into it as well. Outside of that though, so say you don't want to do code, right? Art is always an option. There's a couple different positions for art. You can do 2D art. We're just making actual in-game art assets where you're creating like the sprites and animating those. You can do concept art if you just like to draw, like essentially like what a painter does. You come up with this idea of, this is what the game's going to look like. It's this alien planet with giant crazy plants and things, and concept artist draws out all the different variations and kind of like going with, these are what we want, and they refine down that idea. And that's like a full-time job. Just doing concept art can be a full-time job. And then there's 3D artists who do all kinds of different stuff. They sometimes will generalize and do a little bit of everything, but most of the time they'll kind of specialize. Somebody will be a 3D artist who can, usually they can make a little bit of everything, but they'll make like, I make characters, or I make environments, or I make vehicles. And they're usually kind of specialized at what they do, and they're really good at that. Or a particle and like effects artist, making the visual effects. That's another totally separate skill. Now, if you're not artistically inclined at all, and you're not we're not wanting to code, you can also do the design stuff, which is some of the things that you kind of mentioned, like the story writing, the lore writing, the content creation, and all of that. Those jobs tend to be a little bit, I would say, more about connections and past experience than anything else, because it's one of the positions that's a little bit difficult to show off your skills. But if you know and play a lot of games, you have a wide understanding of game mechanics and game stories, and you've actually, like, if you don't play a lot of games, a game designer is probably not a good idea for you, because you're just going to constantly be thinking of like, hey, I came up with this great idea, and not realize that that's something that's common in like 5 AAA games that have been out this year. You just didn't play any of them. You want to actually be somebody that's active in it. But if you want to get into those positions, a lot of the people that I know, in fact, almost everybody that I know, went in to the game industry for game design positions through either a customer service or a QA department position at first, and then almost instantly transitioned or applied for internal positions for design and transitioned into those. Because when you get into those positions, imagine you're doing a little bit of QA for whatever your favorite game is. The things that you're testing are the things that the designers are putting into the game. So when you're sending back bugs, I mean, assuming that, again, you're not a total jerk and you're friendly and personable, you're sending back this info and you're helping them make their stuff better. The better you do at that, the more friendly you are with them, the much more likely you are to just be able to really switch into those positions as they open up. And they're going to be a lot more likely to, if you, again, are good at the designing and have some idea for it, they're going to be a lot more likely to want to hire you than some random person who they have no experience with and no easy way to vet unless they've got past industry experience. So I think just having some industry experience in the company, it's the best way to get into those positions. Now, the specific positions, I guess, do you want me to break down what some of the different design positions are?
Sure,
Is it
absolutely.
a variety?
Absolutely. So just to recap before you dive deeper into like more specific ones. So Jason talked about the Q&A. Basically, these are the game testers. He talked about being a developer, in which basically you engage with coding. And he also talked about story designers, and he also talked about uh, concept artists. That's concept artists and basically 3D artists. So we've talked about these like 5 general jobs, right? And basically their differences, of course, their nuanced differences. So getting back to you.
Yeah, I think so. What I didn't break down was just the differences in the designers, and
Okay.
I should probably do that. So as you have a company, when the company is really small, maybe you got three people on a team or something, your designer is going to be doing pretty much everything. They're coming up with the idea for the game, the characters for the game, the story. They're doing all of the writing. They're laying out the levels and like designing the levels and setting up the fights, creating the items, and pretty much everything. But as the team grows, most of the time what happens is those kind of break down into specialties.
Mhm.
And as it gets bigger and bigger, you'll find that you've got a subset of designers who are primarily working on the more technical and systems type stuff. So they're figuring out like what makes the game fun, like how does the combat work, how far do the weapons shoot, how much damage do they do, how far do you jump exactly when you're jumping, all of those real technical parts of kind of tuning the game and making it fun and interesting and making it work. And you have other people that are putting in all of the content. If the game is super giant and you have one of those huge worlds, you have a lot of designers whose job is just to put in content, fill out the areas, and make them interesting. So they're dropping in NPCs, putting in little story that has been probably somewhat loosely written by somebody else, depending
Mhm.
on the size of the team. If it's really big, you'll probably have a team or a small team of maybe a couple people doing overarching story for the thing, and then giving people the kind of general idea, like these are the characters, these are what they're supposed to be doing. Now you write the details, and the content designers are putting that stuff in, writing out the details, hooking up the scripts and the paths that NPCs are walking, adding in
Mhm.
the loot and that type of stuff. And then yeah, I guess those are kind of the core designer types. And then obviously you have people who run the whole thing and kind of manage all of that. You'll find that there aren't a whole lot of story design positions, like actually writing for stories is not something that a lot of people do relative to the number of people that are doing like actual content implementation, just
Uh-huh.
because those things, they take a lot longer, and even all the people doing the content stuff are still adding to the writing and adding to it. So you find that might be like 10-to-1 ratio of people doing story versus doing implementation of stuff.
I
Uh,
see. I see.
just
So
because there's so much more implementation work to do.
yeah, of course. That makes sense. That makes sense. If you would like, I mean, if it's possible for you, would you be able to compare these jobs based on their earnings? Like which one of these 5 would make the most if you want to like put them in order? And that's the first question. And the second question is, which one of these 5 are the most competitive to get into when you want to like, look for a job as a concept artist versus a developer. So yep.
Yeah, let's break it down. And there's one more that we'll have to add in there for pay because it's near the top. We'll hit it when we get there. At the bottom is going to be like the customer service and QA, the quality assurance, and that you're going to be right near the bottom. Those jobs generally don't pay a whole lot more than the minimum wage. They pay a bit more, but not a whole lot more,
A
right?
whole lot, yeah.
They're going to be entry level positions, and it's going to vary. Some places will pay relatively nice, but it just depends. It's one of those where I wouldn't expect to make a whole lot and to use it as a jumping point into one of the other positions.
Mhm.
A game designer is probably going to be the next lowest, especially at the entry level, doing the content entry, the content development, partially because it's one of those positions where there are a lot of people who want to do the position and
Mhm.
it's very hard to stand out. That said, when you get to the top, you can make a lot of money. I mean, you can easily get into six figures as a game designer if you've got some experience and have worked and aren't at the junior level. You get up to a more senior level. Next from there would be artists. Usually the 2D and 3D general artists are going to be, and I don't know the actual numbers anymore, but I'm
Mhm.
just going up maybe like another 20% higher than designers
Mhm.
is what they're going to make. But when you get into art, if you really like the technical art, you really like the actual scripting to fix up models, the parts to make things actually work in the engine, and you can write a little bit of code for it,
Mhm.
those positions are way up at the top. So that's like you go from down maybe like 60, 70,000 to 200,000,
Wow.
from this jump to the technical art leads make a lot there. It's one of the highest paid positions. Outside of that, though, so you get past artists, the next ones are usually going to be, and it's going to be a somewhat of a tie between production and programming. I would say that at beginning level, production stuff like producers, associate producers, they may even end up way lower at the beginning, but the
Mhm.
average producer is going to be a bit higher than an artist. And the producer's job is to really manage the product. They're the one who's going through the tracking software, making sure that the tasks are all getting done, that bugs are getting addressed, that customer needs or client needs, whatever it is. They're essentially like the project manager for the
Mhm.
game. And usually you'll have one producer that's kind of the main one, and then a couple people below that are doing the actual grunt work of going and filling out the sheets, preparing all the presentations and stuff.
I
Those
see.
ones get paid a lot less, but the producer might be the top paid person on the whole project. So they're kind of like in between.
I
Um,
see.
and
And
then you go
then
up to,
and when
go
you
ahead.
talk about producer, this person has some expertise and knowledge, right, in the industry. It's not an
Maybe
entry level.
it
Maybe,
can be.
of
That's the
course,
thing. It
maybe.
can be
Uh,
at the high
okay.
end, definitely. The high
Okay.
end, like whoever the main producer is, without a doubt, is somebody who's probably got experience in a couple of those fields or has a lot of business experience or something else that got them up there. Because it's essentially like it's almost like the project leader role.
I
But
see.
the associate producers, the entry level one, is much more like you can get in there as almost like an assistant
Mhm.
without a lot of knowledge in there and then build up those skills along the way. I've seen people go from like, haven't done any game development stuff to I'm an associate producer, like somebody who had a little bit of management skills, right? Maybe
Mhm.
they were a manager somewhere else. And then they've kind of built up because it's almost like a parallel track in game development where you don't necessarily need the skills, but the best producers that I've met actually are like programmers and artists as well. They're like programmer, artist, designer, and producer all in one. Like those tend to be like the best ones. But yeah, I think maybe the other ones are better at the management and money side though. I don't
I
know.
see. I see. I see.
And then from there, the one that I recommend and the one that pays the most by far is programming. So even at an entry level, a programmer is going to get paid probably more than a relatively experienced artist or about the same as the producers. There's a lot of demand for programmers because the skills that you have don't just apply to games, that you can use them outside of game development in any programming. So when they're competing for salaries, they're competing against Amazon, Facebook, all of the other big companies too.
Mhm.
So it really helps keep the salaries for game programmers up there relatively high. And you should be easily into six figures, at least in the US, within the first few years as a programmer. I think starting ranges are in the 70 to 90 now.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome.
And there's
So,
a lot it's a lot easier, I think, to get a job as a programmer than any of the other positions in game development, except for art. If you have a really great art portfolio, if you're
I
able
see.
to like make beautiful art and you can show that off, you can probably get a position in there somewhat easily. But programming, there's so many opportunities. If you can write the code and do the job, it's not too hard to get hired. I don't think. I talk to students all the time who get hired at their first
So,
job.
just to summarize, I'm just making sure that I understood it correctly. So basically, programming is sort of one of those highest paying with the lowest barriers to entry for people, right? And then
The least competition, at least,
least,
because the
yeah.
barrier to entry is learning how to write the code.
Of course. Least competitive. That's the right
Yes.
word. And the most competitive are the artists. Is that right?
Probably designers are the most competitive.
Designers. Okay.
And it's a lot
Designers
harder to set yourself aside, just because you can't do a whole lot of game design without being able to put a game together and actually build it. As a programmer, it's really easy to build a portfolio piece and put together a little game and show that you can do it. With design, it's much harder to show off your skills if you haven't already gotten a position that gave you the opportunity to show off your skills.
I see. Interesting. So basically you answered both of my questions. So the next thing is how one's career evolved. So how your career evolved during these years, and has there been opportunities to work on your independent projects, like the independent games that you wanted to develop or you were passionate about while you were working, or no, it's just sort of a 9 to 5 job and it wouldn't leave much room for you to build your own thing? And is it becoming repetitive, boring? Tell me a little bit about that. So
It's actually very much the opposite.
okay.
So first, I just want to mention that when I started in games, I really wanted to do game design. Like that was the positions that I applied for were all design jobs. And even when I started a programming job, I wanted to do game design. And I kept getting into it. And then I kind of watched what the designers did. And then I saw how much the designers got paid and realized that I didn't want to take a pay cut to have less control over stuff, which is kind of what I felt like I was doing. I know designers might disagree with me. They have more control, but I felt like I didn't want to change that. Once I got into programming, I realized like I can do the design stuff when I want and then be able to implement things on my own. And with these skills, like on my own at home, I can just make a game if I want and play around. And what I saw was that almost from the start, getting into the industry, people were building their own stuff on the side. Almost like there was never a time when there wasn't somebody that I was talking to at the company who had this side project that they were kind of working on or planning out, wanted to know if I was interested in. I can't count the number of meetings that I went to with people who had an idea for a game that they wanted to do. Some of them actually ended up making spinoffs and making their own stuff. So it's very, very common where I found that people would work on their own stuff. Usually as a project kind of matured and got to the point where it was more maintenance and it had already released and didn't really, they weren't actively heavily working on that. They were kind of looking at what the next things might be. They would just start up side projects. And a lot of the time they would even start up side projects and say, hey, I'm going to go talk to the company CEO and see if maybe we can turn this into a game here, and it would turn into a game there. I saw that happen a couple times at Sony specifically, where they were like, hey, I have this idea, and then it became a game that's now out and popular. So it's pretty open. I mean, there are rules with companies. Like if you're making a competing game, you want to make sure that you follow all the stuff so that you don't end up in some legal issue with the company. But most places, if you're honest, open, and just check the paperwork, it's not an issue. At least most places I've been at.
I see.
I think all the places I've been at.
Jason, you just talked about the good stuff. It's clear that you're very passionate about what you're doing and you love what you're doing. I mean, I can sense that from the way that you're explaining everything. and it's great that you have a deep knowledge about all of these stuff. Now also tell us a couple of negative things. We also want to hear a couple of challenges or things that you'd say would be the cons of being in this industry or being in this job. Like so
I'd
far
say,
we have talked about all the good stuff. Now let's also talk about the bad stuff too, right?
yeah, let's say, so the bad things that can happen in the game industry tend to revolve around money. They tend to revolve around companies just running out of money, being overly optimistic, or having other problems related to that. Like I mentioned earlier, my first game job, I actually got laid off 3 weeks after I got hired. So I moved from Washington down to California, took
Mhm.
the job, and 3 weeks in, found out that the company was being bought and everybody was being laid off, and that the layoff list was already made and like a pre-approved before I'd even gotten hired. Right? Before
Wow.
I even got hired, they'd already had the list of who they were keeping and who was getting laid off and stuff. Um, and that was terrible. I mean, for a lot of people there, it was something that came all of a sudden. And
Yeah.
I think this happens too often in game companies, where it's just like instantly everybody on like a Friday or a Monday finds out, hey, project's over, everyone's getting laid off or the company's shutting down. And I just, to be honest, I really hate that way of working. I understand like why they do it out of paranoia and fear, but I think it does terrible things for the goodwill with the company. I think it's a really, really bad idea. People should just be more honest. And if there's somebody that they're worried about doing something, like deal with that person separately instead of treating everybody like they're going to do something terrible. But that's the big problem. Although for me with that situation, it worked out great because I got a severance package and then got rehired. So I
Mhm.
took like a month vacation, got
Mhm.
rehired in the new position. And that only, by the way, only happened because when I got into that job, I was super interested into it and I was working my butt off nonstop, making all kinds of tools. So in the first 3 weeks, I had made like 3 different tools for people there and met a whole bunch of people at the company and made a bunch of friends. So they were like, yeah, we're going to keep you on. If I hadn't been doing that and just been slacking off and doing like the bare minimum, I definitely would have never kept that job. It would have been a terrible experience and I would have moved back. So if you get in somewhere, I mean, even if the job's not the best, like make it, I would say, make it into the best and like kind of turn it into the job that you wanted it to be. As soon as I finished all of my responsibilities, I would just jump onto what's the next thing I can do to be fun, interesting, and kind of give me some advancement here. And I recommend doing kind of the same. Um, Outside of that, though, outside of just the random, sometimes companies go under and they're terrible at communicating it, there's really just, I don't have anything bad to say about it. The people that you meet in the game industry tend to be some of the nicest, coolest people, at least if you're into games, because they're going to
Mhm.
have very similar interests to you. And the companies tend to be some of the best places that I've worked at. So, some of the happiest and just coolest places with the most opportunities. So, say in general, I love game development, and the final thing about it, the final thing that makes me love it the most is just that when you're building games and you actually send them out to people and you show them to people, or like you take them somewhere and you get
Mhm.
to watch people play them and watch them actually enjoy it. I mean, a lot of time you do it and people will be like, yeah, this is okay, here, hand it off. But when you do it right and you finally get a game where people actually enjoy it and they're like, fighting over who's going to play next and taking, not wanting to give it up and stuff, or you're
Yeah.
seeing all these comments come in about how this new update is awesome. That's really, really fun and rewarding, a lot more so than like when you push out a patch and for some enterprise software and somebody goes, oh yeah, well this works a little bit better, can you fix this next thing now? Like you never get the awesome, excited, rewarding feeling
Yes.
outside of game development. It's like a unique thing to that industry.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jason. I feel we had a very productive conversation, and I feel for those who are new and trying to get into, just thinking about gaming as a career, because that's the topic that we're discussing. There was a lot of information, and again, for our audience, I'm gonna put Jason's information in the episode's description. Feel free to follow him on YouTube. And when I sent him an email, he was very humble, kind, responsive. But I've learned that not a lot of people are like that. But I think maybe I was lucky. But anyway, so reach out to him, guys. Definitely, there are a lot of great tips and advices on his channel about gaming and game design. All right. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for participating, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. And I look forward to having this episode published because there are a lot of great things in here.
Thanks for having me, man. It's been a fun conversation.
All right.